The text message came in at 6:52 on a Tuesday morning and I almost missed it entirely. I was sitting in the passenger seat of a rideshare on the way to Seattle-Tacoma International, laptop open, reviewing a network vulnerability report for a financial services client whose audit I was flying to San Francisco to complete. My phone lit up on the center console. The sender was my brother Marcus. The message read, "We made a decision. The house is yours again. Enjoy being alone." I read it once. Then I set the phone face down on my knee and looked out the window at the gray morning freeway and breathed for 30 seconds the way you breathe when something cold and unexpected finally lands. Not surprise. Recognition. My name is Vivian Calloway. I am 33 years old. For the past 8 years I have worked in cybersecurity, first as a network analyst at a mid-size consulting firm in Bellevue, now independently, contracted by banks, insurance carriers, and regional healthcare systems to find the places in their digital infrastructure where things can go wrong before they do. My job, stripped to its core, is this. I look for what people assume is hidden, and I document what I find before anyone has a chance to move it. I am not dramatic about this. It is simply what I do, the way a plumber looks at a wall and sees the pipe behind it before anyone else in the room does. Marcus and his wife Renee had not accounted for that. Most people don't. Let me go back to where this started, because the beginning matters more than people think. My father, Walter Calloway, died 22 months before that Tuesday morning. Cardiac event. 61 years old, still working, still coaching his Saturday morning youth basketball clinic at the rec center 3 blocks from the house he'd owned for 19 years. The house I grew up in. The house in Renton, Washington that he left to me in a will that was simple and clear and witnessed by 2 people and notarized and filed correctly because my father was a man who believed paperwork done right was a form of love. He left the house to me because I was the one who had been nearby. Marcus had moved to Portland 8 years earlier, chasing a series of ambitions that rearranged themselves every 18 months or so, and my father and I had developed the quiet daily closeness that comes from proximity and shared routine. Sunday dinners, the occasional hardware store run. Him calling me when the water heater sounded wrong because he knew I would come and actually look at it instead of telling him to call someone. I inherited the house outright, no mortgage. My father had paid it off 4 years before he died, valued at the time of his death at $412,000. I know that number because I had it appraised within 60 days of inheriting it, which is something my attorney had advised and which turned out to be one of the more important things I did in that period. My attorney is a woman named Sandra O'Coffer. She is 44, runs a private practice in Bellevue focused on property and estate matters, and she has the quality I most value in anyone I pay for counsel. She does not assume the best-case scenario. She assumes the realistic one and plans accordingly. Sandra is the reason I am sitting in a house I still own, telling you this story. Marcus called 3 weeks after my father's funeral. He and Renee had had a rough stretch, he said. Renee had left her position at a marketing agency. Left was the word he used, which I noted, because people who were fired rarely say left voluntarily without a pause before it, and Marcus had taken a consulting contract that had fallen through after 2 months. They needed somewhere to land while they restructured. Just for a few months. Maybe 4. He said we'd do our part, help around the house, keep things up. He said you shouldn't be rattling around alone in that big place anyway, Viv. I said yes, because I had just lost my father and the house felt like a presence I was not yet ready to be alone inside of. That is the honest reason. Not generosity. Grief. Renee arrived first, 3 days before Marcus, with 4 boxes, 2 suitcases and an energy I could not immediately name. Efficient. Watchful. The kind of person who learns where things are kept, not because she needs them right then, but because she wants to know. She asked about the neighborhood within the first hour. She asked about property taxes the second day. I told myself she was making conversation. I was wrong about that. The 4 months became 6. 6 became 11. At the 11-month mark, Marcus had a new consulting contract. Remote work, technology procurement for a mid-tier logistics company, and I thought things were turning. Then Renee mentioned, casually, over dinner, that she had been looking into some investment opportunities and asked if I had considered a home equity line of credit on the Renton property. I said I hadn't. She said property values in the area had climbed significantly and it would be a shame not to leverage that. I said I was pretty comfortable with things as they were. She nodded and passed the salt and changed the subject. That was the first marker. I filed it the way I file anomalies at work. Not as a problem yet, but as a data point that I would remember when I needed to. The second marker came 6 weeks later. I came home from a 2-day client engagement in Portland to find a folder on my home office desk that I had not left there. It contained printed property records for 2 comparable homes in the neighborhood, a printout from a county assessor's website showing the current estimated value of my address, $487,000. It had climbed since the estate appraisal, and a handwritten note in Renee's handwriting that said just some research, thought it might be useful. The folder had been placed on top of my secondary keyboard. My secondary keyboard that I kept in the left drawer of my desk and never left on the desk surface. She had been in my office. She had been in my desk. I went to bed that night and lay on my back with my hands flat on my stomach, and thought very carefully for about 40 minutes. Then I called Sandra Okafor at 8 the next morning. I told her what I had seen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Is there any way they could have access to documentation related to the property title?" I said I didn't think so. She said, "Let's make sure of that today, and then let's talk about what else might need to move." What followed was 4 months of work that I conducted with the same methodology I use professionally: systematic, documented, zero assumptions. Sandra connected me with a title and property fraud specialist, a man named Daniel Reeves who had spent 12 years at a county recorder's office before moving to private practice. Within 1 week, Daniel had confirmed that the deed on the Renton property was clean, in my name only, with no encumbrances. He also explained exactly what someone would need in order to forge a quitclaim deed or initiate a fraudulent transfer: a copy of existing title documentation, my full legal name as it appeared on the deed, a notary seal or someone willing to fraudulently perform notarization, and enough of my personal identifying information to make the paperwork look authentic in an initial review. That list was clarifying. I went through my office and my files with that list in mind. I found that a folder containing property tax correspondence, which included my legal name, the property address, the parcel number, and the assessed value, had been moved from the second drawer of my filing cabinet to the third. A small thing. The kind of thing that could be chalked up to disturbance during cleaning. I did not chalk it up to anything. I photographed it and sent the photo to Sandra with a timestamp. Then I started working the way I work professionally. I installed a network monitoring tool on the home router, the kind of passive logging software that records every device connecting to the network and every external query made from within it. I did this quietly in 20 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon while Marcus was on a call and Renee was at the grocery store. I also installed a secondary router in my office that Marcus and Renee had no knowledge of and no password for, which I used for my own devices exclusively going forward. What the network log showed me over the following 6 weeks was a pattern of searches conducted from Renee's laptop that would have been unremarkable individually. County Recorder website. Notary Public Services, Seattle area. Quitclaim deed template, Washington State. Real estate attorney consultations. Property transfer tax exemptions. Taken together, in sequence, they were not unremarkable at all. They were a roadmap. I sent the logs to Sandra. She called me within the hour. Her voice was the same deliberate calm it always was, which I have learned means the opposite of how most people sound when they are calm. It means she is thinking very precisely. She said, "She's researching how to transfer title fraudulently without your consent. That's the direction this is heading. We need to move on 2 things immediately." The first thing was this. Sandra worked with Daniel Reeves to place a title lock on the Renton property, a fraud alert mechanism through the county recorder's office that would flag any attempted transfer or encumbrance for additional verification and notify me directly. This is a service that exists and that almost no homeowner knows about until they need it. It costs nothing. It meant that any attempt to move my title would trigger an alert to my phone before it could process. The second thing was documentation. I began photographing every document in my home office, every piece of mail that arrived, and every item of value in the house. I pulled the homeowner's insurance policy and confirmed coverage limits. I created an inventory with photos, serial numbers where applicable, and estimated values for every significant piece of property, furniture, electronics, my grandmother's jewelry. The record collection my father had built over 40 years that was kept in the living room in a cabinet he had built himself. I also updated the home security system. The previous system had been installed by my father and was 11 years old. I replaced it with a current system with cloud-based backup storage routed to a server account Marcus and Renee had no knowledge of or access to. Full audio and video coverage of the front entry, the main living area, the hallway outside my office, and the exterior of the property on 3 sides. The footage was stored off-site automatically. No one could delete it from inside the house. Then I waited. The way you wait when you have done the preparation and the only remaining variable is time. The consulting trip to San Francisco had been on my calendar for 3 months. I told Marcus and Renee about it 10 days in advance. I watched their reactions the way I watch network behavior, not for the obvious signal but for the latency, the small hesitation before the expected response. Marcus said, "Oh yeah, how long?" and looked at his phone. Renee said, "That's great, a work trip," and smiled about a half second too late. I left on a Monday morning. I told them I'd be back Friday. By Tuesday at 6:52 a.m., I had Marcus's text. I read it a second time. Then I forwarded it to Sandra. Then I opened the security app on my phone and pulled up the live footage. The house was empty. The living room was stripped. No furniture, no record cabinet, no rugs, no lamps. The hallway was bare. Through the front exterior camera I could see tread marks in the soft ground along the driveway consistent with a loading truck. The timestamp on the earliest footage showing activity was 11:40 p.m. the previous night. They had started in the dark. I watched 40 seconds of footage. I saw Renee directing the movement of my father's record cabinet through the front door. I heard her voice clearly. "Wrap the wood ones first. Those are worth something." I closed the app. I sat in my hotel room in San Francisco and felt something settle in my chest that was not grief and not anger. It was the particular stillness that comes when a hypothesis you spent 4 months testing confirms itself completely. Then I made 4 calls in sequence. The first was to Sandra, who told me she was filing emergency contact with King County Sheriff's Property Crimes Division and that I should do nothing in the house until a detective had been assigned. The second was to Daniel Reeves, who confirmed that the title alert system had been triggered at 2017 a.m. Someone had attempted to submit a quitclaim deed transfer through an online county records portal using a scanned document that purported to bear my signature. The document had been flagged automatically in place in a verification queue. The transfer had not processed. The third call was to my homeowner's insurance carrier to open a claim and notify them of active theft. The fourth call was to a detective named Carl Hutchins at the King County Sheriff's Property Crimes Unit, whose direct line Sandra had already texted me before I finished call 3. Detective Hutchins asked me to describe what I had. I told him, timestamped security footage with audio of the removal in progress, 6 weeks of network logs documenting research into fraudulent property transfer, a flagged and frozen title transfer attempt submitted at 2017 a.m. with a forged signature, a full documented inventory of removed property with photographs, and a text message from my brother sent from his registered phone number stating that the house was, quote, "mine again," which I interpreted as an acknowledgement of intentional action. There was a pause. He said, "Are you in law enforcement?" I said, "No, I work in cybersecurity." He said, "We'll send a unit to the property. Can you be back in Seattle tomorrow morning?" I was on a 6:15 FET a.m. flight. I landed at SeaTac at 8:40, drove directly to Renton, and unlocked my front door at 9:22 a.m. The house was emptied with an efficiency I found almost impressive in the abstract. The furniture was gone. The rugs were gone. The kitchen had been cleaned out of anything portable. The stand mixer my mother had left when she moved to Phoenix. The good cast iron. The espresso machine I had bought myself the previous Christmas. The living room had the ghosted shapes of furniture on the hardwood where pieces had stood for years, slightly darker rectangles in the finish. My father's record cabinet was gone. I stood in the entry for a moment and let that land. Then I put on latex gloves, Sandra's instruction: preserve the scene, and photographed every room methodically. Empty walls, open closets, bare surfaces. I found one thing they had left behind: a manila envelope on the kitchen counter containing a single sheet of paper, a printout of what appeared to be a property transfer document with my name on it and a signature that was not my signature. I photographed it without touching it and called Detective Hutchins immediately. He arrived 40 minutes later with a partner. He looked at the network logs I had printed and organized by date. He looked at the footage on my laptop. He looked at the flagged transfer attempt documentation Daniel Reeves had emailed me. He looked at the forged document on the kitchen counter. He took 4 photographs of it from different angles without moving it. Then he looked at me and said, "This is one of the more complete packages I've seen someone bring in on their own situation." I said, "It's what I do for a living." Marcus called at 11:48 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 32 seconds of silence followed by him clearing his throat and saying, "Viv, call me back. We need to talk about some things," in the measured tone of someone who has rehearsed the conversation and believes they still have leverage they do not have. I forwarded it to Sandra without listening to it a second time. Renee called at 2:15. I answered. She did not say hello. She opened with, "The transfer didn't go through, and we know you did something to block it." Her voice had the tight brightness of someone who has decided that offense is the correct posture and is committed to it regardless of new information. I said, "What transfer?" She said, "You know what I'm talking about. This is your fault. You invited us, and then changed your mind and blocked everything we planned." I said, "Renee, I need you to understand something. The property transfer you attempted at 2017 this morning using a document with a forged signature has been flagged by the county recorder's office and is now part of an open investigation with the King County Sheriff's Department. The furniture, the records, the jewelry, and the other items removed from my house last night are documented on a theft report filed this morning. I have footage of the removal. I have your search history. I have the text from Marcus. I have the forged document. I want you to consider very carefully what you say to me next." There was a silence that lasted about 8 seconds. Then she said, "You can't prove anything." I said, "I know. That's what people say when someone can prove everything." She hung up. What followed was not fast. Real legal processes are not fast. They are spreadsheets and exhibit numbers and scheduled calls that get rescheduled and motions that take 3 weeks to be acknowledged. I know this because Sandra explained it to me at the beginning and I believed her, which meant I was not disappointed when the timeline moved the way it moved instead of the way I might have wanted it to. Detective Hutchins and his unit located Marcus and Renee in Las Vegas, a short-term rental in Henderson, confirmed through a booking confirmation that Marcus had sent to a shared family email account he had apparently forgotten I still had access to. The coordination between King County and Clark County took 11 days. A civil attorney Sandra brought in filed a parallel action for property recovery and damages. Daniel Reeves provided an expert declaration on the fraudulent transfer attempt for the criminal complaint. My neighbor across the street, a retired mail carrier named George Pfeiffer who had known my father for 15 years, told Detective Hutchins that he had seen a large white truck backed into my driveway around midnight and had noted the license plate because it seemed unusual. He had written it in the small notebook he keeps by his front door, a habit he said he'd had for 30 years. The plate traced back to a rental company in Renton. The rental had been paid for with a card in Marcus's name. Marcus's attorney reached out to Sandra 6 weeks after the initial filing. Marcus wanted to separate his situation from Renee's. He said that he had not known about the forged document, that the property transfer had been Renee's plan, that he had believed she had found a legal mechanism he didn't understand, that by the time he realized what had actually happened, they were already in Nevada, and he had panicked instead of calling me. I cannot tell you with certainty what portion of that is true. What I can tell you is that it is the kind of statement that is shaped by legal strategy as much as by fact, and that Sandra advised me to let the process sort out what the process was designed to sort out. The resolution came in 2 parts. Renee's case proceeded to criminal charges: forgery of a legal document, theft over a value threshold that made it a felony, and attempted property fraud. She accepted a plea arrangement that included restitution and a suspended sentence with conditions. The restitution covered the appraised value of the property removed from my house, though 3 pieces were not recoverable. They had been sold in the intervening weeks, including 2 items from my father's record collection that had been in the family for 30 years. Insurance covered a portion of the gap. Some things do not come back, regardless of what the paperwork says. Marcus's separate civil agreement required him to make restitution payments over 18 months for his portion of liability, and to carry no further legal claim to any property associated with my father's estate. Sandra drafted it. I signed it on a Wednesday afternoon in her conference room with a cup of coffee and the feeling of something long held finally being set down. In total, I recovered approximately 91% of what had been taken or attempted. The gap is real and I don't minimize it. 2 pieces of my father's record collection are gone. That is not a number on a spreadsheet. That is the specific weight of something I will not get back, and I have made a place for that fact instead of pretending the math makes it disappear. I rebuilt the house over the following 3 months. I did it slowly and on purpose. I kept the hardwood bare longer than was practical because I liked the way the light moved across it in the morning without furniture in the way. I bought a new dining table on a Saturday in February, alone, from a furniture maker in Fremont who let me look at the joinery before I decided. I turned Marcus's former bedroom into a dedicated home office with a proper standing desk and a monitor setup I had been putting off buying for 2 years. The room that had held someone else's complication and my own unwillingness to name it for what it was became the room I work from now every morning with coffee and the kind of quiet you have to protect to keep. Renee called once, about 4 months after the plea arrangement was finalized. I do not know what she intended to say because she hung up after I answered. I noted the timestamp and moved on. Marcus sent a text on what would have been my father's birthday. It said, "I know I don't have the right to ask anything. I'm sorry, Viv, I read it 3 times. I did not respond. Not because I am certain the answer is permanent silence. I don't know what time does to things, and I try not to make declarations about the future when I am still inside the present. But because I am not ready, and I have decided that not being ready is a complete answer that does not require justification or apology from me. Here's what I want to say directly to you before I finish. People who take from family, and I mean take in the fullest sense, the calculated, planned, researched, executed kind of taking, they rely on one assumption above everything else. They assume that love creates paralysis, that because you care about someone, or once did, or feel that you should, you will not document, you will not call an attorney, you will not install a camera, or read the network logs, or show up to a detective's office with a printed exhibit package. They count on the idea that emotional connection and practical self-protection cannot coexist in the same person at the same time. They are wrong about that. Protecting what belongs to you is not a betrayal of the people who tried to take it. It is not coldness. It is not something you should feel guilty about when you are lying awake at 3 in the morning, turning the decision over and over looking for the place where you went wrong. You did not go wrong. You paid attention. You did the work. You called the people who knew more than you did and you listened to what they said and you acted before the damage was done instead of after. That is not a trap. That is the opposite of a trap. A trap is passive. What I did was active. What I did was refuse to be the person they had assumed I would be. Too sad, too loyal, too hesitant to enforce what was mine, and to be instead exactly the person I had always been, which is someone who looks at a system, finds where the failure is going to happen, and closes it before it does. My father built that record cabinet himself. He built it in the garage over 3 weekends when I was 11 years old. And I handed him tools and he explained each one as he used it. And at the end, he let me sand the last panel and I did it badly. And he said, "That's fine. The piece doesn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping." I think about that when I sit in the office I built in the room that used to hold other people's excuses. I think about what it means to keep something imperfectly rather than lose it entirely. I kept the house. I kept most of what was in it. I kept intact and documented and legally protected, the thing my father left me with more intention than almost any other act of his life. That is enough. It is not everything. But it is enough.